Hi, thanks for joining. My name is Rick Walsworth. I'm joined here by Brent Ellis and Trevor Thomas from Forrester. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Brent?
Yep. My name is Brent Ellis. I'm a senior analyst with Forrester Research, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the hyperconverged infrastructure market, and I'll pass to my colleague Trevor Thomas.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Trevor Thomas. I'm a senior TEI consultant here at Forrester. So working on TEIs primarily within the security area. So happy to be here discussing the total economic impact of VMware's Cloud Foundation with everyone today.
Awesome. We'll get started.
Yeah. As we get into this today, we're going to basically cover several areas. So the once and future HCI will be covered by Brent, our analyst on the project. And then we'll get into a VMware Cloud Foundation overview, which will be presented by Rick. And then after that's complete, we'll go into the TEI and what we found from the TEI study of VMware's Cloud Foundation.
Awesome. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a senior analyst at Forrester Research. And looking at the hyperconverged infrastructure market, it's been around for a little while. I'm sure that you guys have heard of it by now. A lot of enterprises have been deriving value from this for years. Everything from lowering infrastructure cost, ease of use, flexibility, less need for deep technology expertise to manage things. But that market is evolving largely due to enterprise needs. Trevor, if you can go to the next slide. This is from a very recent survey just in February of 2022. And what we're seeing is that IT organization priorities for the next 12 months are really leaning heavily on breaking down the silos of public and private cloud and making it far easier to move workloads back and forth between different clouds and on-premise locations. In fact, 81% are pursuing hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, with 57% of those people listing it as a high or critical priority. 80% are implementing abstraction architectures, so virtualization layers, Kubernetes, and other sorts of tools to allow them to move a workload between different clouds without any changes. And 83% are increasing cloud native deployments, so containers, Kubernetes, and other abstraction layers that help them achieve this goal of being able to develop once and deploy anywhere. Next slide, please. Now, traditional advantages of HCI still apply, but in order to keep up with enterprise needs of being able to deploy across both on-premise and any cloud, HCI vendors have needed to bridge the gap between on-premise locations and cloud compute locations. What you're seeing is that most vendors are adopting some sort of container virtualization orchestration as part of their core platform. Also, many HCI platforms are able to be stretched between on-premise private clouds and public cloud locations, with the leading vendors being able to support all three major public clouds in North America and beyond. Hybrid Cloud HCI also gives that added benefit of consistent management regardless of location, public or private, so that you know what your workloads are doing and where they're doing it and where they're doing it in the most cost-effective manners. Yeah. Extensions of software-defined networking overlays and storage into public cloud improve on public cloud inconsistencies in places where one cloud offers better services than others, allowing you to have a consistent level of service and quality of service no matter where your workloads are deployed. Ultimately, HCI is evolving to really meet the need of enterprises and drive the values that we saw from the earlier slide into the future. And with that, I'm going to pass this back over to Rick, and we'll look at how VMware is addressing this market.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent. And really love those, some of the data points you gave there, especially on the software-defined networking standpoint, because that's where we find a lot of the, not only the advantages that people take, when they're deploying a HCI solution, Sometimes they forget that networking should be part of that to be able to provide those advantages. But looking specifically at VMware's solution within this space around hybrid cloud and full stack HCI is VMware Cloud Foundation. So this is really our hybrid cloud platform that has really morphed over the past several years to be able to not only go into your traditional use cases for hybrid cloud or for data center modernization, but we're seeing increasing adoption around containers and Kubernetes as a way to be able to bring that in. And the advantage there is now I can take advantage of this full stack platform. I have the ability to bring compute from vSphere, storage from vSAN, and networking through NSX, but now bring it together under a orchestration framework that provides automation. That automation in itself really helps to fulfill some of the requirements that we're seeing from our largest customers around delivering this unified platform to be able to support these advanced workloads, and then use the automation as a way to be able to strip out some of the costs, especially around operational costs in managing and maintaining these systems over a longer period of time. The end result is that, as Brent said in his intro, what we see is we see this consistent infrastructure layer. What that results in is a consistent operating model, regardless of whether I'm operating within my primary data center, moving out to the edge, or into public cloud. It gives me the ability to have mobility across those different cloud boundaries, but still deploy a consistent operating model from the standpoint of how do I build and deploy new services much more rapidly than I could before. So on the next slide, what we're going to talk about is, taking a look at how this now extends out across some of those boundaries. As I mentioned, you have these building blocks, these HCI building blocks that I use to be able to scan this out. But on the next click, Trevor, we now have different ways of being able to operate these. I have a customer managed, environment where I do have the ability to be able to leverage either existing infrastructure that they've already made investments in, or perhaps net new infrastructure being done as part of a refresh, but they manage that and deliver this service as a operating model to be able to build that out. But now as I look at the VMware managed, this is really where VMware Cloud comes in. VMware Cloud can run on AWS, or through some of our partner managed clouds. We have the ability to extend into Azure, into Google Cloud, GCP, IBM, and many, many others. We have almost 200 partners that are actually part of our VCPP program that deliver this consistent infrastructure layer as part of their overall cloud deployments. Now, what this means from an economic standpoint, since this is kind of the purpose of this discussion here, is that now I can deploy a solution on-prem, but now extend that solution into a cloud model, whether it be VMware managed or partner managed, with that consistent operational layer. So it gives me now a model that gives me the ability to be able to deploy this at scale without having to worry about getting hung up around refactoring or replatforming applications to make them compatible for cloud. Okay, on the next slide, what I'm going to look at is what are some of the use cases that we see deployed for these types of solutions. So as I mentioned, app modernization is absolutely one of the key drivers we're seeing for VMware Cloud Foundation today. And that not only fits within modern, bringing modern applications, so containers and Kubernetes into an environment, but we also see a lot of customers that are deploying their traditional applications. So these are the applications that are either business critical or mission critical that they're using to run their business today. We see a lot of customers that are essentially updating that underlying infrastructure to be able to bring it into modern standards, now to be able to add in new security layers so I can leverage the network segmentation that I do and microsegmentation that I do with NSX, but then also to be able to bring in some advanced intrusion detection and intrusion prevention capabilities into these existing legacy applications. We're also seeing a lot of data center consolidation happening. This happened, certainly throughout the pandemic, now that we're coming out on the other side of the pandemic, hopefully, but we are seeing a lot more moves towards data center consolidation to be able to, go from a number of distributed data centers back into a more centralized model, and then using edge connectivity as a way to be able to provide data and compute resources out closer to the workloads as possible. Obviously, another big move we saw through the pandemic is distributed workforce, where many companies went from having, let's say, 10% of their employees working remote to 90 or 95% of their employees working remote, and wanted to give them the same experience, but also be sure that you're making these endpoints, these end user endpoints, as secure as possible. So we saw VDI come in big scale deployments throughout the pandemic, but also the move to be able to push that workload protection out much closer to the end users so that they had a complete solution there. And then, as Brent mentioned, hybrid and multi-cloud, we're seeing a lot more of these deployments that perhaps started with a private cloud deployment, but then starts now to be able to migrate into either a single cloud deployment, so I'm hybrid, or into a multi-cloud deployment where, based on the workload or based on the business need, I may be using multiple cloud providers, but then bring everything back to a common infrastructure back at that central location. So now, Trevor, I'm going to hand it back to you so you can take a look at the TEI methodology and how we use this as a way to be able to prove out the VMware Cloud Foundation business case.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So as we go into this, I'm going to talk a little bit about, what exactly a TEI is, and then we'll talk a little bit as well about the customer journeys, and how we use those to help understand the total economic impact. And then from there, we'll go into the study results and what that reveals for VMware's Cloud Foundation. So if we look at, a TEI in general, basically it's a way to help justify, business decisions. And when we look at, statistics around that, over 90% of IT decision makers find value in a business case. So what the TEI does in general is it looks at the IT impacts, it looks at business impacts, and beyond, typical total cost of ownership or return on investment, it also looks at risk, uncertainty, as well as strategic impact. This is very important and, is a very effective way of helping to show a business case or to help justify decisions with technology moving forward. When we look at Forrester's approach to modeling, what we typically try to do is look across, multiple market segments or market sectors to understand how a product such as VMware's Cloud Foundation could have an impact. So in the case of the study here, we looked at, government, we look at business to business, we looked at financial service, as well as commercial goods or manufacturing. The idea here was each one of these different segments had their own unique challenges or reasons to use something like VMware Cloud Foundation. And the idea was to bring all this together to build a composite model to help understand the overall benefits. So when we look at how these vendors came together in terms of Forrester's composite model, what we found was that the ideal or the composite model would have about 10,000 full-time employees, about 750 million in annual revenue. It was a global organization with approximately 10 sites. And the deployment costs of the VMware Cloud Foundation was about 2.5 million. The idea here, again, was to take a broad look to understand how this solution could positively impact different organizations out there. What Forrester did from this, from the study, and this is the high-level view of it, is, we looked at it from a 3-year modeling impact perspective. And really what the analysis of VMware's customer feedback provided was a quantified benefit, cost, risk, and flexibility factors. So when you look at this from a purely numbers perspective, the return on investment was about 171%, with the net benefits being about 9.6 million, net present value about 6 million, and the payback of deploying the solution was just in around 9 months, which is pretty good when you think about things. Forrester's findings and perspective. So some of the main findings that we found when speaking with the individual vendors who had deployed these was there were significant IT security increases due to microsegmentation, as well as in some other areas such as patching and lifecycle management aspects of the solution. They also found that the solution helped streamline the deployment and the lifecycle management, which was extremely important to these different vendors. Efficiency gains in network operations as well was another key thing that we saw, as well as overall decreased operational costs. What we heard in general from the different vendors that we spoke to was that in general, VMware Cloud Foundation provides streamlined deployment and lifecycle management of a complex IT infrastructure while reducing operational expenses and allowing for significant improvements in security posture and employee experience. There was a lot of other intangible benefits that these organizations saw from deploying the VMware's Cloud Foundation, and we'll speak a little bit about them later. So when we looked at these different organizations, as with many organizations going through an IT transformation, they come from a certain state, prior to the deployment. We saw a lot of different things here, but one of the, if we were to summarize things up overall in general, what we saw was approximately 70% of the servers had been migrated to a virtual environment. So what this means is that most of the infrastructure, or 70% of it, was already highly virtualized. There was 30% approximately of legacy equipment or other things that still existed. The vendors also had a low percentage of software-defined networking. So as both Brent and Rick mentioned here, one of the key things in terms of the deployment of this solution is a software-defined networking, and most of the organizations had not experimented in those areas before the deployment. There's a lack of automation and interoperability testing, which were key for number one, the deployment, but also two, for testing patching cycles as well as interoperability on the hardware. And this is key and one of the advantages that VMware Cloud Foundation brings forward, as we see later in the studies. Prolonged security gaps due to the patching cycles. And a lot of this had to do, again, with interoperability testing or just the availability of patches. Increased time and effort from the operations team that could have been spent on higher value tasks. And we'll explore that a little bit further in terms of the reduction of operations team members that then can spend creating additional value for your company in other areas. One of the quotes that we heard, and this was a quote from an individual, a senior manager with an IT infrastructure, but security is always a problem. We can't keep up to date with patching, leaving us open to attacks. As we see here, some of the big, prior challenges had to do with security, patching, interoperability testing, and the challenges associated with those. When we look at some of the key value drivers and the reasons that some of the teams did switch, we look at an increase in security posture, and again, a lot of this was due to the ability to stop east-west proliferation within the software-defined network, as well as decreased ongoing operational expenses, and an increase in operational productivity and efficiency. Again, some of the other intangibles that we saw was the team was always fresh because they don't have to do 2 weeks of patching and vulnerability testing. And there's many other tangibles that led to a positive employee experience and increased people retention. The increased people retention was something that was very relevant, especially in a highly competitive work environment as it is right now. When we look at the 3-year risk-adjusted benefits, and these are all based on interviews with the current customer organizations as applied to the composite, some of the big things, again, that we saw here was the security-related savings, as previously mentioned. So the benefits based on a 3-year, risk-adjusted standpoint is about $4.8 million based on the composite organization. When we look at decreased ongoing operational costs, about $2.6 million. Again, fairly large savings for the size of the composite organization, and net ops productivity and efficiency gains of about $1.9 million. Bringing up the rear here, lifecycle management and productivity related savings was about $400,000 in savings. Forrester feels that over time, this lifecycle management productivity relating would increase in terms of the benefits here. But based on the organizations that we interviewed and how recently the solution had been introduced to them and deployed, this will only increase as in benefits as employees become more used to the solution. Security related savings. So one of the things that we saw here that really saw benefits were with the security related savings was the ability for NSXT to do microsegmentation, which, as previously mentioned, helps stops the east-west proliferation and security events. When we looked at it overall, again, the net present value or the present value was about 4.8 million, and with a 33% decrease of breach impact with east-west segmentation. What this means for you and for your network is that the 33% of the bad guys who are trying to pivot internally with your network will be stopped due to the NSXT and the microsegmentation that it allows. Other security related savings that we saw was the SDC manager ensured that application security patches in a correct manner were deployed, and it helped decrease the security posture overall. Inconsistency of the architecture and deployment was also noted to increase the security posture. So overall, based on where the world is today, significant improvements in terms of security and helping protect companies and their intellectual property. Another thing we looked at, came forward as one of the main benefits, was the decreased ongoing operational costs. And what we saw here was, an overall storage capacity decrease with a one-time cost adjustment savings associated with the reduction of these storage units. This represented about a $2.6 million present value savings over a 3-year period. Interviewees, as expected, also observed the reduction in overall usage of compute power, which then led to savings, of course, within the operational costs due to data center decreases in power usage. When we look at NetOps productivity and efficiency gains, the organizations that we interviewed also saw some significant productivity gains there as well. This amounted to about a 1.9 million present value of 1.9 million over 3 years, with a 30% productivity or efficiency gain in year 1 and about 50% in year 2, 3. Resources redeployment value increase of 30%. And what that means effectively is, with the productivity gains that you have within the NetOps area, you can then redeploy these resources into other areas to create additional value for the company. So pretty good, redeployment value of 30% to create additional value for your company.
Yeah, and Trevor, that's actually one that I've seen come up time and time again in customer conversations and it goes back to the point you made earlier about retention, because the ability to be able to take these, fairly expensive, fairly skilled resources and now apply them into projects that are much more strategic in the organization, provides higher degrees of productivity, but also from an employee sat standpoint, they're now working on, the cool stuff rather than keeping the lights on and maintaining the plumbing, so to speak. They're actually now working on projects that are helping to move the company's top line revenue and bottom line profitability. So I think there's definitely an advantage that's there.
Yeah, and as you said, Rick, I mean, huge gains here, and what that was revealed through the interviews. Especially, like I said, in a workforce that is highly mobile and, it is in quite demand. So just keeping those resources within the company and then being able to use those skill sets in other areas of value to, drive technology forward and make companies more innovative provides huge gains that, quite honestly isn't measured within the study here. So.
Absolutely. Yep.
So when you look at, and speak of what we were just talking about there, but looking at the benefits to use VMware Cloud Foundation for things that customer couldn't quantify, the improvement in employee morale due to the improved employee experience, So keeping those employees doing different tasks each day, keeping them motivated, keeping them interested, keeping them learning, again, within the current VMware Cloud Foundation area as well as others, is only going to bring back, positive value to the company. And what this amounted to was effectively a lower frequency of employee turnover and improved overall well-being of your employees. When we look at the 3-year risk-adjusted costs here, the main cost, of course, was licensing at about 2.5 million, based on the composite organization we looked at, and, an implemented or deployment-related costs of around $1 million. So about, $3.5 million in total, as mentioned previously. The one thing, that quote that was kind of that we heard over and over again through the different companies that we interviewed was, one person has installed more hardware and software in 1 month than they previously could have done in a year. Management is really happy because of the higher productivity. So again, what the solution does is allows you to automate the deployment of the infrastructure. It allows you to streamline the infrastructure, which has, makes management happy from a productivity gain perspective, but not only, beyond this, like the improvements in security as well as efficiency for operations and overall in general.
Excellent.
So if we're to look at, overall summary, what the financial summary of this is, for a 3-year risk adjusted results, 171% return on investment and a net present value of about 6 million. As mentioned here, previously, under a year, about 9 months to break even from the deployment of the solution. But as you can see here, as the solution matures, there's continued value and continued benefits to the organizations as you go forward.
Excellent.
I just want to thank you, as well as our analyst Brent, for joining the Forrester call here in the TEI, as well as Rick from VMware to help us put this together. I don't know, Brent or Rick, do you have any closing comments or anything that you'd like to say on the presentation?
Again, likewise, Trevor, we worked on this project, through the pandemic and through some very difficult times. So I definitely appreciate your perseverance in hammering through this and getting to an outcome. Very happy with the outcome. I was sharing with Brent earlier, I've already had a number of customer conversations around this, so this is very timely. But I think it also brings forward a number of key benefits there that are otherwise hard to measure. And I think the benefit of a TEI project such as this one is that it brings in an independent third party that can go in and essentially run the analysis and then come to an output that a customer has credibility, that they take credibility with. So again, appreciate your efforts, and thanks, Brent, for joining us here today as well.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, thank you, Trevor, to putting some numbers to a lot of the anecdotal case studies that I see in the marketplace. One thing I wanted to highlight, kind of thinking of what the future, looks like using technologies like this. I saw a case study recently where they were leveraging, VMware VCF internally, and they were using a lot of the automation to create self-service infrastructure for their DevOps engineers. And then they were connecting it with the cloud in order to provision cloud resources as kind of a pressure valve until they could deploy additional on-premise infrastructure. And this is one of the ways that they managed the employee experience for their ops professionals, because it meant that they weren't tagging those people to be deploying hardware to support a new DevOps need, in the middle of the night. But it also meant that all their DevOps professionals were able to access infrastructure they needed within minutes rather than days, weeks, or months.
Right.
So this is really one of those foundational technologies that you need within your infrastructure in order to accelerate your time to value for technology projects.
Very good. Well, on behalf of VMware, thank you very much. Thanks for watching this webcast, and thanks to the Forrester team for all your hard work.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.